My family betrayed me, from homeless to taking back what's mine. The weight of it all crashes down on me even now, a year later. It feels like a twisted nightmare I can't fully escape. Parents kicked me out because of my sister's pregnancy. They're reaching out a year later to amend things. But I've moved on. My life irrevocably fractured just weeks after my 18th birthday, during the most crucial week of my high school career. Imagine, finals week, and suddenly, I was without a home. I drift in a sea of textbooks and looming exams. My sanctuary shattered. Thankfully, my best friend, a true guardian angel, and her unbelievably generous parents took me in, providing a haven I desperately needed. I owe them everything. My expulsion was a direct consequence of my half-sister, Sasha, becoming pregnant. In my parents' warped logic, her impending motherhood warranted a full-scale upheaval of my life. Sasha wasn't even my full sister, which only added another layer of absurdity to the situation. Let's just say my mother and stepfather, Jacob, had a complicated history. She was dating Jacob in college and got pregnant with Sasha right before graduation. They weren't married and eventually went their separate ways. Although Jacob still wanted to be involved in Sasha's life, my mom then met my biological father a few years after Sasha was born. A year into their marriage, she became pregnant with me. But my father wasn't ready and wanted an abortion. My mother refused. After my father abandoned her while she was pregnant, she severed ties with him and his family before reconciling with Jacob. My father died when I was still a baby, and my mother and Jacob got remarried a few years after her divorce was finalized. But Jacob never truly accepted me. Growing up with Jacob and Sasha was like living with strangers. He'd been cold and distant ever since I was a child. Sasha treated me the same. My mother, bless her heart, always said she loved me equally, but her actions screamed otherwise. There was always a painful distance. Despite my earnest attempts to connect as a child, I was met with constant rejection. As I got older, I resigned myself to the fact that they were a unit, and I was merely an unwelcome guest in their home. So, when Sasha announced her pregnancy and her desire to move back in, I should have anticipated what was coming. But the blow still landed hard. I clung to the hope that my mother would finally stand up for me, that she'd finally choose me. I should have known Sasha would always be Jacob's priority. It was roughly a year ago, mere days before my finals, when Sasha dropped the bomb. At 24, she was expecting, and my parents, fueled by some twisted sense of obligation, decided that the only solution was to kick me out to make room for her and help her save money. Sasha and her boyfriend lived in an apartment not far from our house. I figured she could just stay there. But no, she wanted the comfort of home. She said she didn't feel safe being alone in the apartment. Her boyfriend had to travel for work often, so she wanted to move back in with her parents to save money on rent and not be alone. And that would have been fine, but her boyfriend wanted to come too. That's when Sasha and my parents decided she would come home. The plan, to evict me from my room for a few months because Sasha needed it. Jacob had converted her old room into an office. Think of it as a sacrifice for your family, they pleaded. The sheer audacity of their request, delivered with such callous timing, sent my stress levels soaring. I was already drowning in exam anxieties, and they were worried about Sasha and her needs. I drew a line in the sand. I told them point blank that I wasn't leaving. Sasha had never treated me like family, so I wasn't about to sacrifice my stability for her. My parents, naturally, tried to reason with me. It became an argument, escalating until Jacob snapped. He declared that I had to be gone by the end of the week, or he'd forcibly remove me because I was an adult and he, as head of the household, had the right to decide whether or not I could stay. I was expecting my mother to jump to my defense, but instead, she sided with Jacob. "We need to make room for the Rio Grande," she said dismissively. Her use of the phrase Rio Grande was like a dagger to the heart, confirming what I had suspected for years. My mom, Sasha, and Jacob were their own tight-knit family, and I had always been on the outside. The sheer injustice of it all propelled me into action. Numbly, I began packing my belongings, ignoring the looming exam the following day. They didn't even try to stop me as I walked out the door. Their priorities were clear. I ended up at my best friend's doorstep, a broken mess. When I recounted the events of the past few days to her and her parents without hesitation, they welcomed me into their home, offering me a safe place to stay for as long as needed. I'm sure you're wondering why I didn't turn to other relatives for help. Frankly, there was nowhere else to go. Jacob's family is just as awful as he is. They would have actively avoided helping me. My mother's side of the family, they were a complete mystery. She always told me that when she became pregnant with Sasha, her parents disowned her, wanting her to focus on her studies. They didn't want her to have a baby because she was too young. So she did anyway, and no one has spoken to her since. They weren't even present for her wedding to my father or me. At least, that's what she told me. So, with no other options, I relied on the kindness of my friends. After I was kicked out and moved in with my best friend and her family, I kept expecting my mother to reach out. I had no such expectations of Jacob or Sasha. What really hurt me was that my mother didn't reach out at all. After a few months, I gave up hope completely. It has been a year since then. I found out from friends that Sasha had given birth a few months ago, and that she and her boyfriend had been posting about their new life as delighted parents. They are still living with my parents, probably to save money on rent. I honestly don't care about any of that stuff anymore. I've been working on improving my own life. After graduating from high school, I needed to figure out how to get to college. It wasn't easy without my parents' financial support. My best friend's parents were generous enough to let me live rent-free, but I couldn't ask them to pay for my tuition, especially since they had 2 children of their own. I was apprehensive, but thankfully, I had applied for numerous scholarships, and because I was a brilliant student, I was awarded one. It wasn't my first or even second choice of education, but I couldn't pass up the opportunity to save money. The scholarship covered 60% of my tuition, so I chose to get a student loan alongside my closest friends' parents as co-signers. I promised them that they wouldn't have to worry about repaying the debt, because I would work while studying and pay it off myself. That is what I've been doing. It's been difficult, but knowing I'm succeeding on my own is wonderful. I hadn't heard from my family in a year, and I wasn't expecting them to seek me out. Surprisingly, approximately a week ago, my mother emailed me and asked me to come home for the weekend. She claimed she, as did Jacob and Sasha, wanted to reconcile with me. She stated they were aware they had treated me unfairly. The email felt off. My mother was unusually charming, faking sincerity. Call it a gut instinct, but I sensed something was wrong and did not answer. A few days later, she wrote another email, which I disregarded as well. Despite my urge to find out what was going on, I realized there had to be another reason they were reaching out a year after kicking me out. It seemed overly convenient. I received my answer 2 days later, when my maternal grandparents contacted me. I was shocked they were able to contact me, as I was certain my parents had not given them my information. They explained that they had to inquire around and eventually obtained my phone number from one of my high school acquaintances who trusted them enough to disclose it. He turned out to be my best buddy, and I'm glad she didn't tell me since it was a welcome surprise. My grandparents called and I couldn't believe it was them. I've never known them, seen them, or heard their voice. I was hesitant at first, but then they facetimed me and showed me old photo albums of my mother from her childhood and adolescent years. That's when I started to believe they were my grandparents. We all got rather emotional. I'm not sure why, but I just did. We began talking, and I shared details about my life. I tried to avoid talking about my parents, but it was pointless because they already knew everything. They claimed that one of the main reasons they had not contacted me before was because of my parents. They recently discovered the truth, which prompted them to contact me. I was perplexed. My mother had always told me that when she became pregnant with Sasha, my grandparents cut her off. That was everything I knew. However, there was more to the story. My grandparents emphasized that they were not opposed to my mother having Sasha. Rather, they opposed her connection with Jacob. My mother had lied about her parents to safeguard Jacob's reputation. My grandparents had been supportive of her pregnancy and informed her she had the freedom to choose. However, they did not approve of Jacob because he was a well-known addict. They had all grown up in the same area, attended the same high school, and even went to the same college, so my grandparents were well aware of Jacob's background. They promised my mother that they would financially assist her during and after the pregnancy, but only if she broke up with Jacob. They didn't want him to influence Sasha. After much thinking, my mother ended their relationship because Jacob couldn't get his life in order. My grandparents took complete custody of Sasha when she was born, and Jacob had only supervised visitation privileges for the first few years. Jacob eventually finished his degree and became clean, so my grandparents never trusted him completely. They introduced my mother to my father, who is the son of a family friend. After a few years of seeing one another on and off, my mother married him because she had given up hope that Jacob would ever recover. But it appears she has never completely moved on from Jacob. A year into her marriage with my father, she began an affair with him and became pregnant with me. At that time, my mother had to tell my father about the affair since she couldn't picture her life without Jacob. Now that she was pregnant, she needed to tell him the truth. Her infidelity was the reason she got a divorce from my father and later married Jacob. So everything Mom said about my father's opposition to having me was a lie. After I was born, many paternity tests were performed, and I was happily not Jacob's child. I was in fact my biological father's daughter, which was a relief because I had no desire to be Jacob's biological daughter. My father even had partial custody of me for a period. although I scarcely remember it because it was so long ago. Unfortunately, my biological father died in a vehicle accident when I was 7 months old, allowing my mother to lie to me for the remainder of my life. My father's side of the family refused to have anything to do with me after his death, which was convenient for my mother. My grandparents were really disturbed when they discovered my mother was having an affair with Jacob. They gave her another ultimatum. She could either shut Jacob out of her life completely and focus on her marriage with my father, or she could get a divorce and never speak to them again. This time, my mother chose Jacob because he had been clean for about a year, longer than any of his previous stunts. That was a final major disagreement my mother had with her parents. My mother was still pregnant at the time, and they did not communicate again until after my birth. My grandparents ultimately softened and decided to contact her so they could meet me. But Jacob refused to play along and form a happy family with them, because of how they had treated him. So my mother turned down their attempts to reunite. My grandparents did not give up, however. They attempted to contact my mother every several months, but she never accepted them back into her life. This continued for years until Jacob and my mother had financial difficulties and were unable to pay their rent. My mother had no one else to turn to. My grandparents gave her a house, hoping that it would bring them closer together. It was about 6 years ago when my family moved into our new home. It was a great improvement over the apartment we used to live in. I often wondered how my parents could afford such a wonderful property in such a desirable neighborhood, given that my mother was a receptionist and Jacob worked in a failing company. So it seemed unlikely that they could afford it. I now realize that was all thanks to my grandparents. Despite this, my parents, being the ungrateful people they are, did not attempt to repair their relationship with my grandparents. Both my mother and Jacob were aware that my grandparents had paid for the house, but my mother insisted that they were not ready to reconnect and needed time to think about it. My grandparents, being naive, gave them room for a few months, but when my mother did not respond, she kept claiming that she needed more time. This went on for years, and my grandparents eventually admitted that perhaps it wasn't meant to be. They were getting older, and told me how humiliating it was to continually attempt to contact their daughter, only to be denied each time. They finally admitted to my mother that they understood why she no longer wanted to be around them, and regretted themselves for not being gentler. The only thing they wanted was that my mother continued to send photos of our family, so that they knew we were doing fine. Surprisingly, my mother agreed, and for the past few years, that was how my grandparents stayed in touch, which was quite sad. They told me everything and I burst into tears. I had always thought of them as villains, but that was not the case. Now as for how they discovered the truth, my grandfather just had a health scare. They couldn't keep pretending everything was fine because they weren't getting any younger. They wanted to make one final attempt to reconcile with the family before passing away. They stopped by my mother's house a few weeks ago, which is technically still theirs because they paid for it and their names are on the deed. When they came, my mother had no choice but to welcome and entertain them. They discovered they were great-grandparents when Sasha had her children. But when they asked about me, my parents became really uneasy and had no idea what to say. So they informed my grandparents that I was away at college, and that it might not be a good time to contact me because I was in a vulnerable state due to exams. They couldn't even come up with a false college name, which led my grandparents to suspect something was up. They had a gut feeling that my parents had made a mistake, so they left the house to speak with our neighbors. That is how they discovered that I had not been living with my parents for the past year. After being kicked out, the neighbors didn't know why, but their son, who went to school with me, informed my grandparents that I had been staying with my closest friend's family for a while, and they could know more. That's how my grandparents got in touch with my best buddy, and they eventually found out what happened to me. They were furious when they discovered the truth. My grandparents informed my mother that she and her family would need to evacuate the house in order to make room for their only real grandchild. It was the epitome of retaliation, using the identical things my parents had used to me. My best friend ensured that my grandparents knew just how to press that nerve. It now became clear why my parents were attempting to reach out and make amends. My grandparents waited a few days to approach me after learning everything, because they were concerned about how I would respond. They eventually decided to go forward with it, since they had wasted so many years worrying about how my mother would respond, and they wanted to do the right thing now. However, my grandparents also wanted to give me the freedom to choose what I wanted. They told me that if I wanted to give my family another chance, they could continue to live in the house, but if I wanted them to leave, that is what would happen. Apparently, when they came, no one in the family seemed pleased to see them, and I was the only one who appeared truly interested in developing a relationship with them. My grandparents refused to be taken for fools anymore, so I had to decide whether I wanted my parents to have a home or not. If I'm being honest, that sounds a little harsh. I'm not sure whether that's the appropriate thing to do. Update. Hello. First and foremost, thank you for all of your encouraging words. It means everything to me and I appreciate it more than I can. Regarding my decision, I've concluded that I do want my family to leave that house. I told my grandparents a few days ago. Of course, there's a lot of legal stuff involved which my grandparents say I don't need to worry about. My parents have also been emotionally manipulative, particularly Sasha. But my grandparents are impervious. After speaking with me, they learned about all the falsehoods my mother had been spreading, and how she had poisoned their grandchildren against them. They have no more sympathy for my parents. To be honest, Sasha and her partner are working grown-ups, so I'm confident they'll find something out just like millions of others. The same applies for my parents. I don't feel guilty about any of it. After all, they didn't feel horrible about kicking me out. Despite this, I was able to perform well academically even though it occurred just before my exam. I urged my grandparents not to worry about my college tuition, but they insisted on handling the student loan I had taken out. They also apologize. We have a lot to talk about and make up, but everything is going great right now. Update 2. Hello. My grandparents began evicting my family a few weeks back, and they have till the end of next month to depart. My mother is not pleased. She felt compelled to inform me, writing in a mail a few weeks ago in an attempt to regain my trust, and he'll most likely, so her parents wouldn't kick her out. The email was quite different from the one I had received before. This one was full of sweet talking, saying she wished she hadn't given birth to me. She even said she wishes I had been in the vehicle accident with my father, so we might both have died. So that's my mom for you. But it no longer bothers me, since to me she is not family. If I'm being honest, my only family now consists of my grandparents, my best friend, her parent, and a few relatives who my grandparents are introducing me to. My mother broke them off long ago since she didn't want anything to do with her family. It's an unusual scenario, but I'm adjusting. Update 3. Hello. The holidays have just begun and I'm back home in my old house. It feels strange to be here, but my grandparents have been living in the house since my family departed, and they've done an excellent job of renovating. Even my room seems like home again. We'll be throwing a Thanksgiving dinner shortly, and we've invited some family members. Where's my best friend and her parents? I feel like my life is finally getting back on track. I'm very happy, and I wish I could stay this way forever. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you. So, tell me honestly, based on everything you've heard, do you think I made the right decision? Should I have allowed my parents to stay in the house? Or was evicting them the justified response to years of mistreatment and betrayal? I'm genuinely interested in hearing your perspectives, even if they differ from my own. What would you have done in my situation, knowing the full extent of the circumstances? Share your thoughts and opinions with me.